Test 1, 2, test.
Okay, great, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, good morning. Need to turn it up a little bit. Okay, hope. Need to go up. Okay, can you hear me all right? There we go, great. Good morning. All right, good morning, good. Welcome to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. How many of you have ever been here before? Oh, a good number, that's great. How many of you have been here in the last year? Ooh, still a good number, but for those of you who haven't been here within the last year, you really haven't seen the Hall of Fame. We've gone through a major expansion and renovation, so it's really very different as you go through than from when you were here last time. So we hope that you have time today, and your teachers have allowed you some time to see the Hall of Fame and experience what we present on the history of pro football. And we're here today as a part of our celebration of Black History Month. Now it's interesting because, you know, what Black History Month means to me and my age and my demographic is probably different than what it might mean to you, because I have a point of reference that is different from you, having lived in a different era. The same is true of our guest speaker, Mr. Lanier, who I will introduce here in a moment. But we hope today, from what you hear from Mr. Lanier, is a perspective of not only how things were, but how things are and how things can be, and what we can do, each and every one of us, to be a part of the positive changes in this country that have occurred, will occur, and hopefully that we contributed to. We should all be what we like to call enablers, people who help make change, and make change in our personal lives, make change in our families, make change in our country, make change in society. So those are all the types of things that we hope that we focus on as we think about Black History Month, all the changes that have occurred and how we benefited from them, how some have suffered through them, and how it'll make things better in the future, and how all of us need to contribute to that future. Now, before I go into a long introduction here, I want to recognize our schools here today. And please give yourself a loud round of applause so we know you're here. Now, wait. No, we don't want a group applause. We want to hear from each individual school. Ginn Academy. That's going to be tough to beat. Campbell Memorial High School, Campbell, Ohio. All right, pretty good. How about Maple Heights High School? Maple Heights, are you here? There we are. Ooh, you get shit. Cuyahoga Community College. Come on. But they're a loud, small group. Massillon Washington High School. Our neighbor. The Arts Academy of Canton, Ohio. Early College Academy in Canton. I think we have a winner. All right. Now that you have my attention, I need to get your attention. All right, terrific. I'm glad you're energetic. And did we skip somebody? Oh. I'm sorry, I missed two. Oh. We have Early College Academy, and then we have STEM Academy from and I do have East Tech. Please, East Tech. Let's hear it now. Come on. John Adams. All right. You never ever want to exclude somebody, so forgive me for that. All right. We want to focus now, if we can, just for a few minutes, while I give you a brief introduction of our very, very special guest speaker here today. Mr. Willie Lanier, aside from being a very good friend, is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, what does that mean? What's really important about that? Mr. Lanier played professional football as one of his life skills, and he played it at a level that earned him the highest possible honor an individual can make in the sport of professional football, and that is election to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which occurred in 1986. Well, Mr. Lanier played for the Kansas City Chiefs. He had an 11-season career as a middle linebacker, and an important part, I'll come back to that middle linebacker role in a minute. But he also played in Super Bowl IV, which was one of the most historic games in the history of the National Football League. These are all just some of the things that, in terms of what he did in professional football, he was a Pro Bowl choice 8 times out of his 11-year career. And that was in a day when the Pro Bowl really, really meant something. It was much more difficult to make a Pro Bowl team than it is today. It was a high honor back then. He was also, and this is very important when we talk about character, Willie Lanier was also the NFL Man of the Year in 1972, not because of what he did on the football field, but what he did in the community. It's something he's been dedicated to his community, not only back then, but even today. He was the NFL Players Association Linebacker of the Year, 1970, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, and this is an era when there were some really great linebackers in the National Football League, but that's how dominant Willie Lanier was. But Willie Lanier's football career wasn't the only thing in which he was successful in. Willie's been successful in life after football. He's been an owner of business. He joined an investment banking firm of Wachovia Securities, which was formerly known as Wheat First Securities. He's been somebody, as we were talking before in our ride over to the building this morning, he was something that I call, and I always wondered what it meant, I call him an entrepreneur. And it was really, an entrepreneur is more about spirit, the spirit to take risks, to take challenges, to try and do something that no one else has done. And that's what he's done his whole life. I'm going to let Willie explain his whole life, but I just want to give you that brief introduction to let you know that you're not only going to hear from a man today that has had a tremendous pro football career, but he's had a great life. He's had a life in which we should take life lessons from. He had life lessons from others that influenced and inspired him as well. So we hopefully will all learn something from his experiences. And we're going to make the majority of this a question and answer session with you and him to talk about some of those things in life that not only influenced him, but hopefully will influence you. So let me first say that I want to run a quick video. It's a very short video, but it will give you a little bit of an idea of just what a dominant player Willie Lanier was, and then we're going to say what a dominant man Willie Lanier is.
Middle linebacker Willie Lanier was a dominant force on a Kansas City defense that dominated the league.
Good shape, baby!
Nicknamed Contact, Lanier punished his opponents with precise, earth-shattering hits. His uncompromising play catapulted him into 2 AFL All-Star games and 6 Pro Bowls.
You didn't get that.
All right. Before I turn the microphone over to Willie, just 1 second, guys. 1 second. Before I turn the microphone over to Willie to give you kind of a brief introductory remarks by him, I did want to go back to that thing about linebacker. This is very important. It's important not only in what we know about Willie Lanier, but I think what you should know about Willie Lanier. In the 1960s, life was different in the United States. I think we're aware of that. But when Willie Lanier came into the pro football world, he came in as the first ever African-American to play the important position of middle linebacker. And for those of you who may not understand the game as intricately as certainly Willie does and others of you in the audience, the middle linebacker is the quarterback on defense. And there was this stereotypical image that African-Americans couldn't be in positions of leadership. So this was a man who not only had to make it as a pro coming out of college, which is a challenge enough, but had to make it as a black pioneer in a specific position and in a league that was earning its own as well. So that is an introductory remark. I want to turn it over to Willie, give you a little bit of his own background. Then, Willie, we're going to go right into Q&A as we did last time, maybe get him a few more questions in such a large group.
All right.
All yours.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning. Thank you all for coming out on a most challenging day with weather in central Ohio. I spoke to another group a little bit earlier, and as it was being introduced, I had shifted into, I have a multiplicity of different people who happen to have lived my journey. And I was saying to that group that I didn't focus initially on the football because I focused more on the business side of who I am and things that I've done. And I'm going to do both today. But since you all enjoyed seeing that footage and you heard me laugh during a game, and that might have seemed a little bit odd to you because it was a heck of a tackle, I thought. And it was a game in 1972 against the Baltimore Colts in Kansas City. And because I attended college in Maryland, Morgan State, I knew a lot of the Colt players. I knew Johnny Unitas, I knew Lenny Moore, I knew John Mack, I knew Jim Parker, I knew Tom Maddy. I knew them because they and our school was close to one another, and some of the players would come over and speak to us as I'm speaking to you today. And they would start giving some of the young men their ideas about what to expect in the future from a football-related standpoint. So you started to have an understanding of it would be expected, how to manage it, how to go forward, and how to play. So I was wired for sound that time for the first time at the opening game of the Chiefs Stadium in Kansas City in 1972. And because I know Tom Maddy, and he had a ball thrown to him, as you saw, he was circling somewhat over the middle. The ball was thrown high by Unitas. I came in and made a textbook tackle. I mean, a shot, that's what it was. Made the play, he hits the ground. And he says to me when he hits the ground, I caught it. And I thought I'd really hit him hard enough where it knocked the ball loose. So when I looked back above his shoulder, I could see him holding the ball. And to me, that was funny, because here was a play in pro football where it's not about harming the other player. It's not about you're trying to injure, he trying to injure. It's about an athletic contest where you respect him, he respects you. You make a great play, he makes a great play, an even better one, and you acknowledge him and you get ready for the next one. So I offer that because that also becomes a part of the who you are and how you play a game. And I think it was good to just speak about that because over most of my career, it would be the same way in terms of a play, a solid play, good play, and I acknowledge one way or the other. But I'll go back to a beginning, and all of us have beginnings, and you have had some of your beginnings. You're here today to continue your journey forward. And a lot of mine rest on being inquisitive. A lot of mine rest on having knowledge. A lot of mine rest on having a breadth of knowledge so I can compete with people anywhere at any time and discuss most anything at any time and try to do it eloquently at any time, because that was always important to me. Because my view is that for you to be as successful as whatever it is you think you want to be, you have to be quick in thought, have breadth of knowledge, have interest in many things, and let people know that you do have interest in many things, and therefore that might get you the next, whatever that next happens to be. So I asked the earlier group, as I read the USA Today, I have the Washington Post with me from yesterday when I was flying in. How many of you read a newspaper this morning? May I have hands, please? Ooh. Okay. Now, some of you might want to feel that you have some of these other social media, maybe television as a way to absorb some of the data. But I still use newspapers. And I still use newspapers because it's important to me to try to absorb as much current data as I can from different spaces as I can. Most mornings of the week, Monday to Friday, I'll pull up to the top of my driveway, reach out of my car door, pick up a Richmond Times-Dispatch and a Wall Street Journal, and I'll thumb through most subjects. I'll then get downtown and I'll buy a USA Today, a Washington Post, and probably 3 times a week a New York Times. And I'll go through because I'm searching for things. I'm searching for information. I'm searching for data that can be important to me if I'm in discussions with someone about investing, involved with someone which is primarily about investing and having knowledge to compete with others as far as why my brain works as well as theirs and my knowledge could be equal to theirs, then I have to have knowledge of many different things. So as an example, I was thinking about this morning, I read in the USA Today that the federal government is going to be spending $13 billion additional dollars on 13,000 jobs for healthcare workers in the next 5 years. So I'm not sure what job opportunities you are thinking about. And for many of you who might think that pro football could be one of your job opportunities, I think there are only 1,800, 1,900 jobs in that particular industry, and they tend to be rather short term. So if you were paying attention to what was written today, you would have recognized that there are opportunities in a healthcare environment that could be something that might fit you, depending upon your interest. Because your interest is going to be that which is going to take you to wherever that outcome might be. And it's going to be your individual interest, not someone else's. So with that being the case, this whole newspaper point is one that if you were to have looked at television this morning, and you happened to have seen the show that I was looking at, I think it was MSNBC, they were talking about next week they're going to have a billionaire on their station, and you could send in questions to ask him. That's Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. So I'll get back to that also. So it's about all of these things making a difference. But one point about Warren Buffett is that he also sold newspapers when he was growing up. Right now he's buying them because he can buy a whole lot of things. So as we talk about Black History Month, as we talk about the fact that maybe 50 years ago, my first year going to college, there would not have been a room of black and white individuals in Richmond attending a function together. The high school that I attended was segregated. The college that I attended was segregated. Started to have a few whites in my third and fourth year. So all of that is relevant. And the relevancy for me goes back to May of 1959 when there was a contest for the newspaper carriers, Richmond Times-Dispatch in Richmond. And for those newspaper carriers, if you won the contest, you had a chance to go to Miami, Florida on a wonderful trip for a week. So at Union Station in Richmond, May 1959, all of those students, black and white, boys and girls, arrived at Union Station, Richmond, and prepared for their journey south. And everyone was on whatever the trains were at that moment. We arrived at the train station in Miami, Florida. There happened to be 2 sets of buses, as many of you were bused here today, except those buses were segregated. There were buses for the whites and buses for the blacks. And the white youngsters were taken to the Fontainebleau Hotel on Miami Beach, which is one of the big, still outstanding, dominant hotels on Miami Beach in Miami, Florida. Those of us who were black were taken to the St. John Hotel in a place called Liberty City, urban, away from the beach, the water, whatever. So that was the really first time that I really had clarity that, there's a difference in my country. There's a difference in whether I perform well and compete evenly, the outcome might not be the same. So I'm 14 when that occurs. So with that as a base, it started to cause me to recognize how important education was, how education does not guarantee, but you had to put the work in to have the better education. You had to continue to be inquisitive enough so you aren't just studying from what the teacher puts in front of you. You're trying to absorb data wherever it is, because that data can possibly save your life. I'll add that point to it, because it can. And in the way that all of those things come together, you have no way of knowing at this moment today of how that really will be the case. But each day, you have a responsibility to be accountable for self. You have the personal responsibility of trying to extract everything you can out of that day. you have the responsibility of recognizing that freedom is not free. Freedom gives you all kinds of options, as it does for all of us, and we embrace it wholly. But there are a lot of consequences when you don't utilize your freedom properly. So what you try to do is to be able to embrace as many things as possible. Try to look for outcomes that it's even hard for you to project. At your age, my sitting in high school at a program such as this, I had no idea many of the things that I've done, many of the things that I've become. I knew I had interest in business. I knew I had interest in finance. I knew I had an interest in all those areas, but I had no idea how it was all going to unfold. I happen to have had the benefit of having a brother that was 2 years older than I, with four of us in the family, 3 sons and a daughter. And my brother, 2 years older than I, was the one deemed to be the better athlete. He was the one who was much stronger, bigger, really committed to sport. I told the group here earlier that he was 16, 17 years of age, about 5'10", weighed 185 pounds. From a weight standpoint, he could clean and jerk 350, which was just incredible to me. I really didn't have interest in that kind of journey. But what it did was to set someone around me who had a great breadth of athletic talent. And I started thinking that if I had some of that kind of talent, and I could mesh it with other things I was doing, that very possibly some of my outcomes could be that much better. So as I moved from high school, now I'll just speak about college, I was a business major. And being a business major, I was very serious about the things that went on in school. But one of the things that can occur from a sports standpoint is that you might have an injury. So my second year in school, I had a hairline fracture of what was called the tibial spine in my left leg, and I missed 3/4 of the season. So I then realized that I have to be more than serious about coming out with a degree. And it wasn't about going to school to play or attempt to play pro football, it was about getting the degree. So once that occurred, the focus became even more pronounced as far as the degree requirement, and that was able to unfold itself very neatly heading into 1967. But for many of you who haven't followed pro football, and you might have followed it more in recent years, it's something called the American Conference and the National Conference now. It used to be the AFL and the NFL, and they both were competing against one another. Some of this goes back to the merger, and all of that is just legal jargon, but it is a part of what is happening today. Because if the leagues had not gotten antitrust legislation in their benefits, they would not have been able to merge, because that would have been deemed anti-competitive in our country. And we feel that businesses have to benefit the consumer, and for them to be able to do something that's anti-competitive, many times that's at law not allowed to happen. So they had to have Congress agree to their merger legislation. And that year was 1966, the beginning of my senior year in school. So I had a paper that I wrote for our business class on the monopolistic aspects of pro football. And that was written particularly because I knew I was interested in playing, but I was also interested in the business of pro football. I was interested in how a merger would affect me from a playing standpoint when there would not have been two entities vying for my skills at that time. And unfortunately, there was a filibuster by someone named Emanuel Seller, Democrat from New York, who was not able to forestall that legislation. So the merger passed, and that which you see now in terms of the National Conference and the American Conference, all creating this wonderful game that you're able to watch, came about because of legislation in Washington. So if any of you are ever in Washington, D.C., and you want to go by the Library of Congress and think about maybe some of the things you heard here today and thumb through some of the documents from 1966, I think it becomes very interesting, because what you want to do is to continue to expand opportunities, expand the reach, expand those things that can give rise to who you are and what you are trying to achieve. One of the things that Joe had mentioned, and when you came in, there was a trophy on the right-hand side of that hallway, and there was a Gladiator trophy, and it's now called the Walter Payton Award. That's the NFL Man of the Year trophy. And that was the award that I won in 1972, the first African American to win that award in the league's history. And it provided $25,000 in scholarships for 5 Kansas City students. And with it providing that kind of scholarship, it was really interesting because many times we think of sport from an athletic standpoint, but the scholarship was not just for sport, it was for anyone who was attending high school at that time. So in 1986, after I was named to the Hall of Fame in Richmond, Virginia, there was a scholarship named for me, the Willie Lanier Scholarship and Development Fund, and I started inviting in Hall of Famers to be the speakers. I invited in Joe Green, I invited in Alan Page, I invited in Lamar Hunt, I invited in Bobby Mitchell, most of them Hall of Famers, and they were very happy to attend the event for me. But when I was at a telecommunications conference in Washington, D.C. about 6 years into the program, I happened to see a young man who was making a presentation, the same way I'm here with you all today. And as many of you would be able to reference me in your futures of saying, Mr. Lanier, I met you at so-and-so. Well, if you reference that, I'm going to immediately react to you because we were in the same space and time in the same moment. The other thing that is important for you to recognize is that if you want to reach out and connect through me with a question of what you might need to do, as long as God grants me the time on this planet, you can do it. But all you have to do is be doing positive things, trying to go somewhere where you need the next. And with that, you'd be surprised at what can happen. So I'm at that event in Washington, D.C., a telecommunications conference, and I look into the audience, this young man comes up to me and starts to speak, and I realize that 20-something years ago, he won one of my scholarships in Kansas City as a high school student. He is now an attorney with U.S. West Telecommunications in Denver, Colorado. And he's speaking at a conference where I'm attending. I said, son, what are you doing on May 10th, 6 weeks from now? Because I want to invite you to be my speaker. It doesn't have to be the Hall of Fame person, because you are the embodiment of what happened. My scholarship, because of my skill and ability that they granted me with my name on it, benefited you. And then the next thing that it did would benefit you and your family exponentially. So all of a sudden you start realizing that those of you who sit in this room have the ability to touch not only you, but all that will come from you. The same way your family is happy about you, their children, you are their lineage. Then the continuation of that occurs over time. And the breadth of that continuing over time is fascinating because you have no idea the next place you might be, the next place you can influence someone. Imagine 20 years from now, or some period from now, one of you in this room, if it's athletics, you might be standing here, if that were the case. If it's business, someone might be writing about you having thought up some new app that someone might have paid your company $1 billion for it. The same way Russell Wilson had said with the Seattle Seahawks this year, why not you? And that's true, because everyone came from a similar place. Everyone came from a question mark of wondering, what might I achieve? Everyone had to have a way to have inquisitiveness toward that. We had, at my home, fortunately growing up, my parents, my father worked for an electrical supply company, and my mother was a beautician, but they had the American Medical Journal in the home. So I read everything I could find, and I always read that journal. So there were things that coaches were talking or asking me to do athletically that I would challenge them based on the American Medical Journal. It's not that I'm trying to be more than someone else might think, but if I have information, I'm going to challenge you, because I'm free and I have the responsibility to do that. There was something called duck walks many years ago when we were growing up that coaches want you to do in terms of sport. But the American Medical Journal talked about the fact that that expands your ligaments when you're trying to have your full development. And I said, sir, that's not something whatever. So it was one of trying to have that kind of database to make decisions. A question that was asked earlier in terms of one of the challenges I had, or the biggest one I had playing, and one of those would be this. How many of you in this room have ever had a concussion? How many of you have been unconscious for 15 minutes having had a concussion? How many of you have been unconscious for half an hour after having had a concussion? Okay, none. Half an hour, okay. The reason for this question and the point of my ability to always have information to assist me was that in my first year in Kansas City, trying to be dominant in the way I played the game, playing it maybe at times a little too aggressively, because I'm on this player safety committee with the NFL that's going on as we speak. We just had our conference call 2 days ago on Tuesday with John Madden, Ronnie Lott, and all of them. So I'm making a play out in San Diego my first year. I leave my feet, make a tackle, catch a knee in the forehead. It's a jar, but it's not one that I'm ever out. It's not one that I had any headaches. It's one that when I left the field looked like it was doing a little bit of that, but then 10 minutes later after showering, it was okay. So I presume that I'm all right. The next week goes by, I'm at practice every day, and I notice nothing that should be a question, except that next week, in the process of calling a defensive play, I collapse and I'm out for 2 hours. And the reference to the 2 hours is that you didn't see anyone in this room raise their hand for being out an hour. Most times, if you're out for 2 hours, you die. That's the reality. So I wake up in this emergency room trying to project where I am, what my life might be, what has happened. How do I just fall out without any warning, and then try to realize that it came from playing a sport, and would I play the sport again, and all those kind of questions that you would have. Subsequently, I was sent to Mayo Clinic for all the neurological tests to be done, and I asked the physician, the attending physician, whether I could have an unequivocal clean bill of health. He said no, because I had survived. So then I thought that if I'm going to play, I have to figure out how to be 90% safe. I have to make sure I'm taking care of me for the future. And in doing that, I was able to design a game based on physics, geometry, and logic. And that's the way the game was played for the next 10 years, and I didn't miss but 1 quarter the rest of that time. The reality was that no one told me to do that. I also then told the team that I would never have a pain pill, a cortisone shot, or a knee drain, because that's not going to happen. So what that did was to indicate the fact that as I stand here, and I'm 68, I have nothing wrong with me physically or mentally from having played that game, because there were decisions made based on information that I will challenge anyone when I have my data. So you are tasked with the same thing. You are tasked with trying to have more data so you can make your decisions. If you have to make a decision on what college you're going to attend, if you have to make a decision on what programs you're going to be involved with, if you have to make the decision on what advanced work you need to do, all of that becomes incumbent upon you to do that. If you have to then decide how you dress, how you speak, how you want to be viewed, I'm an old school guy, and I'll say it like that. And what that means is that 7 days a week, I put on a shirt and tie. Because I just do. It feels normal to me. Sometimes my neighbors think I'm a little strange, because I might even do a little yard work with a shirt and tie on. But they figure that's that football player, so something's wrong anyway. So, and I just say that as a joke. But the reality is that each one has a responsibility. So I'll add something else to our discussion. How many of you would like to go to the White House to meet the President of the United States? Okay. Also recognize that if you are able to go to the White House to meet the President of the United States, the first thing they ask you is to send your Social Security number so they can do a background check, which is required. You can't get close unless you are doing the right thing. There have been 44 presidents in our country's history. This hand has touched 5. And I am as respectful of that more than probably anything that I've done, because I've touched the hand of 5 of the men who've served in that office in our country's history. And it comes from a relationship, and it comes from sport. The first was 1972. Washington, D.C., National Drug Conference, President Richard Milhouse Nixon. And I'm able to have a hand being shaken with the President of the United States. I have that picture at my home. George H.W. Bush, during a time that it was Republican spring fling, and I'm a moderate Democrat, but I was asked to attend this function in Washington, D.C. I think it was $10,000 a plate. I didn't have to pay it, but I was being invited as a Hall of Famer. So I'm talking to a congressman who invites me, and I said, well, what things would you like us to do? He said, we would like you to have a pre-reception, go through a line, meet the president and his wife, sit on the dais during the evening, and then have a post-reception. I said, okay, but it's a Republican function, and I don't know whether I would be comfortable, but let's do it like this. I can do 3 of the things that you mentioned. I don't want to sit on the stage because it would imply that I'm in agreement, and that's not where my political view happens to be. He said, I'll call you back. Fine. He calls me back, and he invites me because now I want to have this opportunity to meet the President of the United States. So we're at this function, and if there is a line of 100 people waiting to walk up, the aide tells the president, this is Joe Horgan and his wife, Willie Lanier and his wife, you turn, they click, 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 you have your picture and you walk away. I'm standing in that line trying to think, what can I, as one person in this country, say to the President of the United States to get more than that 5 to 6 seconds? Hold still, click, and you're gone. So what I thought about was that in Richmond, Virginia, the company where I worked, Wheat First Securities, was being run by a gentleman named Jim Wheat III, very much involved in Republican politics in the state of Virginia. Richmond is the capital of the state of Virginia, so therefore there's a lot of interaction between Washington and the capital. And as I was standing there thinking about getting close to the President of the United States, I decided I'm going to ask him a question. So as we got there, and the aide says to the President and his wife Barbara, standing next to him, this is Willie and Barbara Lanier, I stand in front of George H.W. Bush, and I say, Jim Wheat sends his regards. And I knew or felt he would know who Jim Wheat was. It wasn't important about whether he knew who I am because I'm one of many. So what happened is that he started to speak about Jim Wheat. And each second that he spoke, I internally smiled because here I was able to gain presence in time with the President of the United States. He spoke about Jim Wheat for about 60 seconds. And I was overjoyed when I came back to Richmond and told Mr. Wheat that I had been in Washington previously, and I took license with referencing him, and he and I had not spoken about it, but I hoped it would not have been offensive. Of course it wasn't offensive. But my point is this. Each day or each place that you are trying to present yourself competitively to anyone else. And it's not just those in your school, it's not just those in Canton, it's not just those in Ohio, it's across this entire country. And when you find yourself with a job, with a future, you might be competing with those across the world. And if that's the case, you're constantly having to try to test yourself, be confident about yourself, and not just feel you have to always do those things that you feel okay in doing. I told the other group a little bit earlier that with things being what they were many years ago, and with racial issues or segregation, many times if you were black growing up in the South with some feelings of oppression, you might find yourself, if you were looking directly at someone who was white, you would lower your eyes for whatever reason. I'm in Kansas City in 1967. All the coaches in Kansas City were white. There was a coach named Tom Bettis, linebacker coach, my position coach. And he comes up to me and he's asking me some questions about things, and I lower my eyes. And he tells me, look at me when I talk to you. And the reason he said that was that he realized that this young man, this African-American young man who is still confident but somewhat challenged by the societal realities, that unless his confidence is raised where he can feel equal to you because you won't be able to defend or beat anybody unless you're equal. And a very simple thing that happens is that if I do not feel comfortable directing my look toward you, how am I going to be comfortable trying to achieve anything else? So that kind of history, if it's being stated, going back and looking at how all of these things have unfolded, become a part of what Black History Month happens to be. 2 days ago in Richmond, I spoke on one of the programs, as I did even 3 Sundays ago in Richmond. And because of being in Virginia and because of the history of the state and a lot of the different challenges that have occurred, sport has had the opportunity to give people a way to, I think, be more honest about America, to be more honest about who has a better opportunity to achieve fairness that can be seen and put in its right place at all time. All of those things come from a history of achievement and a history of trying to go forward and do many things. Once we had the scholarship fund and in Richmond, I've been able to give, I think, almost $600,000 Richmond Public School students. And those $600,000 has been there to improve their futures, to give them a way to go forward. And the joy in doing that, when we would have our scholarship dinners, would be if when any of you are trying to head to school and the thoughts that you have about how is it to be paid for, and if someone is able to grant you, because of your wonderful skills, $5,000 to $10,000 to take that pressure from your parents to assist you, or maybe jobs that you have, you feel wonderful about that, but it would have been your work over your entire period of time that created and allowed it to happen. So I'm not sure where we are with our moment, but I think we're close. And my view is that for how many of you who happen to have been here today, who have taken your time to listen to someone who had sport as one of his backgrounds, but also the business side has been investments, stocks, bonds, private equity, venture capital, any of those things that you read about and want to discuss, I can discuss it. Happen to have had an opportunity to own part of an automotive logistics company. And at that time, I was telling another group that an error could create a $10,000 a minute liability. I played 11 years in Kansas City, only had 5 penalties, so errors don't benefit, and they can't be a part of my journey with anyone. So understanding that you're constantly trying to do things to separate you from others, you're trying to constantly wanting to be that person who might achieve somewhat more. And if you're able to assist someone, they assist you, and you can share in their joy and they can share in yours. And at some point, and it's hard to know that I might have had a bust here in Canton, and it feels a little bit strange sitting there looking at something that many times, I know it looks like me, but most times you aren't here to look at those when they sit there next to you. So thank you very much, and if there are questions, I'll let Joe proceed from here.
Well, I think you heard that Mr. Lanier has a very, very wide and varied experiences in life, and we've had some questions put to us from some of the students here today that I'm now going to ask Willie, and I'm going to kind of twist some of them together because a lot of the questions are very, very similar. But one theme that keeps coming up, Will, is that the question seems to be, how does it feel, A, to be a legend in pro football, but maybe more importantly, how does it feel to be an icon in Black history? And that's kind of an interesting question because I know he doesn't think of himself that way, but if I can start your answer and then let you finish it. But, I don't know how you can really fully appreciate, the gentleman that you have here with you today without really appreciating where the country was in the 1960s and even the 50s in terms of race relations. It was a very, very, very difficult time in our country. And everybody was handling it differently. Different states had different laws. We were talking over dinner last night. It would actually be a felony for a black man and a black woman to be together in some states. So it was a very different world. Willie went to an all-black college, came into a new league that was trying to find its own identity and was inviting black players to play in that league more so than in the National Football League at the time. So there were a lot of things going on in the country that were very foreign to most of you here in the room today. But if I can go back to the question, Will, what does it feel like, or how do you feel the responsibility that you've carried your whole life of presenting yourself as an African-American pioneer, and as you retire from your pro football career as, quote, what we call a living legend? How's that influenced you as you went forward in your life?
I think the hardest reality of a question like that is that that's not something you seek. That's not what you were trying to become. All you were trying to do was express your gifts the same way the rest of you are trying to express yours as you go forward. It's not that anyone is near perfect. You always have challenges, as I have, as you have, and trying to maintain a balance as you go through your life. But it was one that I felt that I have a voice. And out of the 317 million people in this country, because I happen to have been in a sport and because sport is acknowledged in this country, I'm able to stand here and speak to these two groups today because I have a bust in this place. And that's very interesting because each of you have the opportunity to listen to someone somewhere sometime. Or if you were to reverse it, to be the one who's able to deliver the comment, there's a lot of responsibility that your fortune has allowed you to be in that place. So my journey has been one where I have enjoyed and thanked the Lord for blessing me with the ability to keep reaching, trying to achieve, dealing with whatever issues you have in front of you, trying to make them work in your advantage, allowing yourself to keep a positive view and an attitude that is required to keep going. Because that point of keeping going is that it's not one that you decide that you've reached some point and you've finished. I think even if you were looking at the Olympics, I believe a part of the Olympic Creed was the essence in the struggle, not the victory. So it is one of continuing and trying to be able to present in that particular way.
As a kind of a follow-up, maybe, as you think about your everyday life, and you will hear from people like Willie, who talks about some of the obstacles and hurdles he had just because of the color of his skin. And you think, boy, I wish I lived back then. I would have done something about that. Every day there's obstacles that we can remove for others as we look at the world, not just because of the color of their skin, but other obstacles. One of the things that's in the news recently, well, in the last couple of days, in fact, and you told a story earlier, did the class earlier, about the N-word. The NFL is now talking about maybe even legislating penalties if that word is used on the field. Would you mind sharing the story about your sons and the lesson you taught them early on?
Yeah. I'm going to ask you all a question, and I'll ask you to be honest and raise your hand. How many of you in this room have used the N-word in your life? Okay, all right. All right, okay, all right. So, all right, that's fine, thank you. I wanted to ask that so we can have a discussion, because that's the only way to have people affect change, is to have an open, honest discussion about those realities. So with that, I've used the word, I grew up with it. And in some places, what you would try to do, even when someone white might use it in your sports environment, you would try to choose who was okay to use it and who wasn't, in my view, because that's what some of us did, okay? So at times, that becomes very challenging because it's too difficult to do all of that. So with the NFL talking what they're talking about, from a political standpoint, a legitimate standpoint, we discuss it. I was telling the other group that growing up in basically my children, all-white community in Kansas City, my boys attending a predominantly white school, my concern about them being called that word, and because of where I grew up in the South, I told them, and their mother didn't agree, but I told them anyway, if someone calls you the N-word, punch them in the nose. She says, but you shouldn't do that. I said, I have to do it the way it makes sense to me. So that's what I told them. And then my feeling was that if it occurred in school, I would challenge the administrators of the school that they were allowing an environment similar to what we're talking about now with the league, of individuals making comments that was injurious to my children. That's not acceptable. And I would have challenged that any way or time if it had happened. So that didn't happen in school. What occurred was that I was on the way home from practice one day. I turned the corner, and there was a little boy walking up the street from my house with his head in his hand. And I thought, he must have called my son that word. So about 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. This young man's father is standing at the door. So I said, before you say anything, let me explain something to you. I have told both of my children that if they are called that by a boy, punch him in the nose. The only place that a child could believe that that word can be used okay is in the home. So if you have anything else to say to me, say it. He turned around and walked away. So the point is that this whole discussion is a very legitimate one. It's one that the word should be. There's no context to it because it's a hurtful word. Sometimes people try to use things that they want to redefine. But if you look at human beings who were put on slave ships hundreds of years ago, brought to these shores against their will, many dying in the journey. I was in Africa, November of 2008, prior to the first African-American president being elected in this country. It's real, you feel it, because it's a part of your history. And that part of your history going all the way back to Virginia when states wanted to say there was something called states' rights. And they used that term as states' rights to trump the federal government trying to change things. The Washington Redskins didn't have a black player until my freshman year in college. I'm growing up watching this team 100 miles away from me. I don't see anybody that looks like me playing for that team. You're framing your view. You're framing a view that it's okay one place, not okay another. So this is just comments that relates to a very relative discussion. I thank you all for your honesty, because that's the only way to have a discussion that ends up having relevance.
All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience, and then we'll come back to some that have been submitted to us. Who do we have that would like to ask a question? Here we go, right here, Jerry, right on your left there. Why don't you say your name and the school you're from?
My name is Dante. I'm from Ginn Academy. Mr. Contact, this question is for you, obviously.
Honey Bear after the first year. It was Honey Bear after the first year.
His nickname was Honey Bear after Contact.
Well, Mr. Honey Bear.
Okay, cool. Okay, fine.
I noticed looking in the highlights and things that your helmet wasn't standard. So why did you choose it, or was it given to you?
The helmet wasn't standard because of my concussion my first year. So the equipment manager was trying to do something that was not researched or engineered, but had certain logic to it, of trying to put a pad on the helmet that could absorb some of the blow that might disperse. It wasn't engineered. I don't know whether it worked or not because I didn't really use it. I moved my head after that. But it became a brand. It became one that became very noted in league history because as I wore it, and it was very different than other helmets at that time. But it was, as I said, it was an equipment manager trying to do something positive to assist someone who was playing on their team.
Willie, we have a question from a young lady back here. Why don't you state your name and your school?
I'm Lauren, and I'm from Early College. And my question is, what made you want to become a football player, and when did you start?
I would say in this room, all of you started playing sport at a very early age. I was no different. I started playing sport at the same time that most of you did. I happened to have played all sports that were seasonal. I grew up next to a playground, so there were always kids out attempting to play, and that's what you did. But I had an older brother who was a very good football player, and my interest in football probably came about because of his good skills, and therefore many times what I was trying to do was to be equal to my brother. So I didn't have a great drive, if it were, to try to play pro football and those at that time, because it was not one where the doors were necessarily open, and it was one where the opportunity presented itself, and then it occurred from there.
I think we have a question over on this side. Oh, right there. Okay, your name and school.
Hello, my name is Deshaun Bone. I want to know who influenced you to play football.
Well, really, from an influence standpoint, there were athletes in our neighborhoods, there were coaches who were very focused on athletics being a positive aspect in your life. So it just became one of my size indicated that as I continued to get bigger, it appeared that I would have a great opportunity to be more involved in football than maybe basketball or baseball. Because I was hit by a baseball when I was 15 years of age and I didn't like that. So you had to do those things that
that was actually
you
a
enjoy.
question too, Willie, that somebody very similar to that question, and I don't know if the answer is any different, but wanted to know who in your life inspired you?
It was not inspired from an athletic standpoint. It was inspired from hardworking parents, hardworking grandparents to have a family lineage. My grandparents were tobacco farmers, so I spent time there in summers. Both parents worked out of the home, and I was very interested in their efforts. And you observe others, the educators who were trying to enlighten many of us to be competitive in an environment where it was challenging, and you always were trying to be better. So you were constantly trying to push yourself to be better, to offset many of the issues that were surrounding you. And it really became almost like a village, where it takes a village to raise. So if many people around you are being positive about what they're trying to achieve, trying to implore you to be considerate of that, and there's nothing wrong with being good. There's nothing wrong with being great. You don't have to be boastful about it, but it's okay. So as good as you can be, you should be it. Because at times it surprises you. God gave me the gift to speak extemporaneously on most anything at any time. And my confidence is such that I can be anywhere in front of any group, and I will speak and have not one hesitance of question. So there are many things that you are able to do, many things that you should seek to do. And if that is the case, somewhere in your future, you will surprise yourself. Because as Joe and I were talking this morning coming over here, none of you know anywhere near what you will know. None of you have done anywhere near what you will do. But that should create the joy for the potential outcomes that can occur.
I think we have another question over here somewhere. Oh, there we go.
My name's Charles. I'm from Gannett. I wanted to ask you, did you ever get ran over?
Did I ever get run over?
Like truck or something?
No. I tended to deliver. You saw a little bit of that film?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not being, see the bust? I'm here. Okay, so what happens is that those of us who are here tended to be a little bit on the other side of that equation.
Can I ask a question? I want to volunteer from somebody who's bold enough to answer a question I ask. Anybody want to volunteer to answer my question? Yeah, right back there. Did you raise your hand?
He raised it.
Come on.
He can't hide. We know who you are. We saw you.
All right, so would somebody take him a microphone, because this is a question. And this is a question that you're not going to have any time to think about, but it might be one you've already thought about. And in this kind of, as I'm looking out over this age group, I'm curious, what do you think is the greatest challenge of your generation right now?
Going to school.
That's a great, huh? No, that's a great answer, because it is a challenge for some to go to school. It isn't a birthright, and it's a gift when you get to go to school. But I mean, if you look at school, you're obviously suggesting that it's an important thing in your life. Well, what is the major obstacle that you face as a young man in life today? What do you think that is? There's no right answer. I'm just asking. I'm just curious as to what you think.
I don't know.
You feel there's no obstacle in life right now. Anything's possible, right?
Sports.
Sports? Okay. All right. Does anybody else want to try that? Because I really, yes, ma'am, right there. You.
Okay, my name is Samaria. I go to Early College, and
What do you feel from your age group right now? What do you feel is a major obstacle or challenge in your life?
trying to become something and getting. Oh my.
Let me give you a little suggestion here, and now I've got some others who want to answer. But as an example, when Willie and I were roughly the same age, when we were your age, maybe the answer would have been to be able to vote. Black people weren't even allowed to vote in some instances. Maybe it might have been to be able to go to college. There weren't college opportunities. But let me ask, we have someone else who wants to try. What do you think? Hi.
I'm Charmaine.
Charmaine.
I think one of the biggest obstacles we have for my generation is probably being leaders. They're so concerned with like impressing their peers. They don't want to stand out and do stuff on their own.
Excellent
So
answer.
it's probably a problem.
Jared, right there. If we can have your attention one more time. We have someone else who wants to take a shot at this.
I'm Dominique Gordon. I'm from Madison, Washington High School. I think the biggest challenge we face in our generation is living above the standard people set for you. As a young black girl, people think that you're not as educated as you are. They think that you have to fit into the mold of society. And right now, we don't have enough black kids who are standing up, like Charmaine said, and being leaders for the people who are younger than us, or even the people who are older than us and don't know any better. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. Now, if we could, I'd like now, if I could, just to have Mr. Lanier comment on particularly those two comments, because you've defined an issue and a problem that is not just generational for you. It's been an issue and a problem for a generation of people. So, Will, if you would kind of think about what you just heard and offer
The risk to being a leader is to be wrong. But to not be able to offset that risk, you can't be a leader. I have hired people at a company to work for me, and I would say to you, regardless of the job description, you have to make decisions when I'm not around to ask. You have to make decisions. If you're wrong, it could be problematic for you. If you're not able to make that kind of decision, I won't hire you. Because I only want people who can be in lead when I'm not there. I'll give you an example of leadership. And this happened in Chesterfield County, Virginia, where I live in the Richmond area a year and a half ago. Any of you have allergies when you were growing up? How many of you had allergies when you were growing up? Allergies. Okay, all right. Question, did any of you know of someone who ever went into anaphylactic shock? Okay, now, for those of you who have not had an allergy and maybe don't realize that someone going into anaphylactic shock, you can die, and there are EpiPens that kids who have potential allergies take with them to school. In Chesterfield County, Virginia, February 2012, there was a 7-year-old kid who went out for lunch, and she didn't have her EpiPen. She came back into the school and went into anaphylactic shock. You don't have to know exactly how long it takes, but that death sentence is coming, about 90 to 120 seconds. The medical staff at that school, knowing other kids had EpiPens, the school's rule was that they couldn't use the EpiPen. So there was no one there who showed the courage of leadership of taking an EpiPen from another child, giving that child a chance to live. The child died. All right? So you want to talk about leadership? Leadership is being able to make a decision. Leadership is not about making a decision when everything is fine. Leadership is about making a decision. I'll give you another one. 9/11. I was in Canton, Ohio, 9/11. We had a golf tournament. About 9:45, we were on a golf course, we called in, because we are seeing things that you are seeing. The person at the FAA in Washington, D.C. was not the current director. The director was on vacation, so the previous director was in the tower or in Washington, D.C. at the Federal Aviation Administration. So once that second building was hit, he knew that something was occurring that never happened in this country. He didn't have time to talk to someone in a committee. What he knew was very simple. The planes in the air possibly could be used as a weapon. The planes on the ground that might have weapons on them were still on the ground. So he calls a national ground stop. Every plane on the ground in this country has to stay on the ground and cannot fly. Then they put out a directive that every plane that was above U.S. airspace had to be on the ground in 90 minutes. And if you're not on the ground in 90 minutes, they might have fighters up to break you down because they don't know. Well, he made that decision because he showed leadership in a moment of time that had never occurred in this country before, but that's the essence of leadership. So everyone should work toward a thought about what you would do in scenarios, how you would manage a scenario wherever it is, because at some time the person you help can be you and the person next to you.
Very good. And if I could, I want to just, before we take one more question, I want to turn that around a little bit, because obviously you're in a sports facility today with a sports legend, and say how being on an athletic field teaches leadership as well. We had mentioned earlier that Willie Lanier was the quarterback on defense. He didn't have time, once that ball was snapped, to sit and think, what should I do? He had to have leadership qualities about him, make the read and react, and take the action necessary to stop the play. To your question, did anybody ever run over you? I can tell you nobody ever ran over him. But that's about leadership. It is about leadership and understanding your responsibility and your job. In everyday life, we face those types of situations every day, like that air traffic controller. You have to make a decision. You don't get redos. But you have to, as a great leader, will make a choice. If it's wrong, he'll learn from it. You can't be afraid to make the choice. Any more questions? Another question out here. I saw somebody had a hand up over here. I'm sorry, young lady over here, Jerry.
My name is Brittany, and I go to early college. And my question is, who was your biggest inspiration?
You have to put the microphone up near your mouth so we can hear you.
There was a question about teachers who like you, teachers who dislike you. And I think that's relevant because that occurs. There was a teacher who didn't like me, and her name was Miss Diamond. See, when you ask the question, I'm 68 years of age. You never forget that teacher didn't like you, in your view. So, for some reason, she didn't feel that I must have presented the best skills in her math class. And I thought I was rather studious as my life unfolded in that particular subject. But at that moment in time, for some reason, there was not a meshing of the relationship. So those are things that you have to work through, maybe in the way that I continue to study and do other things from a business standpoint. That all, for me, was not an issue. But that's the one that I remember from a high school standpoint. And many times, I think outside of that, you'd have the coaching relationships when they taught as well as coached. But I think that there was a professor in Baltimore, Dr. Walter Fisher, that I was very close to, who became sort of a mentor that was helpful in your life as you went forward.
Okay, I think that was our last question. I see a couple of schools have to leave already, so please give a nice round of applause for our guest today, Mr. Willie Lanier. Thank you all for being here today.